Good morning, everyone. This is Joy Wang from Dendreon. For those who don't know Dendreon is the first cell therapy get approved by FDA in the United States. Welcome to our session, the cell therapy evolution from scientific breakthrough to scalable investment. All right, so we heard actually this is the first cell gene therapy panel in the history of Barreal Elite, so really honored to be the panel here. And also, we have a really exceptional panelists today. And before we get on the stage, Vidak, our event organizer, just friendly gave me a warning. He said, Joy, please remind your honored panelists, don't use too much scientific terminology because otherwise you're gonna lose us. So I will try my best to keep the balance between science and business as I usually do. But I think it's not an easy job, especially in the space of cell gene therapies, because this is really science-driven area. But I will do best in my own experience. I feel this is challenging because I came from pharma side. I probably share a lot of frustration that you guys when looking at the modeling where pharma use CAGRs using DCF models for the forecasting. And it's sometimes very difficult to find established benchmark or camp for the valuation. And so that's what we are here today exactly and try to find the bridge and also explore how science and business finance can finally speak the same language. I think in 2025, this is a really exciting year because we saw a lot of activities in the M&A market. Novartis just announced acquired Avidity, and BM has acquired Orbital, and AbbVie acquired Capstan. But in the meantime, there are also some sour feelings. For example, Novo Nordisk withdraw from the cell therapy space, and also Takeda wrap up their internal efforts for the cell therapy. So really people ask the question, where's the future of a cell gene community? Is it still sustainable? Where's the bottleneck? And how can we find opportunities for the investor? Unfortunately, we have a great panel here to help us find a solution and answers for these questions. So without too much ado, I'm gonna do a quick introduction for my panelists, and then I will turn to them to to help us find the solutions. I'll start with Kristen Hege, and she is referred most cases as a queen of CAR-T community, if I can say that. She served as a senior vice president of Crystal Squibb, hematological and oncology cell therapy, and literally she's one of the original architects for CAR-T era. And also she worked as a practicing hematologist for a long time. And even she retired from the position, she still continued to contribute to the community by coaching and also chairing multiple startup company as their board positions and advisor positions. Thank you very much, Kristen, joining us. So next I will say Dr. Shyam Patel. Shyam is a vice president of the preclinical development of California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. So this is a well-known government fund for public and non-dilutable grant dedicated for cell gene therapy, backed for almost $10 billion US. And then Shyam and his team has actually done a lot of heavy lifting work to develop and execute CIRM's long-term strategy and to accelerate the translation of a cell gene. Richard Ransohoff, he is a partner of Third Rock. He leads the investment of a really pioneering biotech company like Bluebird in the field. He actually, before joining the venture side, he worked as a vice president of Belgium and also as a practicing neurologist for almost 30 years in Cleveland Clinic. So he literally bring in not only the insights of the science and also clinical and to the investment perspective, but also gives a lot of advice for the investor as well. Last but not least is Jason Foster, the CEO of our Biotech. the company specializes in automation and digital platforms for cell gene manufacturing. And Jason led multiple leadership positions across consulting, pharma, technologies. Now he focuses primarily on the automation and also digital platforms for cell gene. So with that, I'm going to really turn to our incredible panelists for the questions for today. So the first question I want to start with Jason and Shyam. Well, I think, Jason, you've been working with the first line of innovation for a while, and also you guys work with a lot of fascinating technology as well. So what do you see is the breakthrough make you still confident that cell therapy or gene therapy is not just a fiction or scientific dream? And for Shyam, I think I have a follow-up question for you is, with the new wave of technology, what do you see the change for the investment calculus?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Thank you all for having me. As the non-scientist on the panel, I think it'll be easy for me to keep it in the room. But I think the reasons for optimism for cell therapy in particular is the incredible clinical impact that the patients have that receive it. So if it was modestly better, incrementally better, almost as good as some of the existing biologics and small molecule interventions that we have, there's a chance that potentially the modality wasn't necessary. But what we're seeing is revolutionary outcomes for patients. We're seeing patients who are late stage, pick your hematological cancer, maybe multiple myeloma patients that go from weeks to live to a complete response, having no signs of cancer in their body. And this is incredible outcomes that we've never seen before, sort of clinically and scientifically. So I think the good news is that the safety and efficacy argument for cell therapy has been proven, in my perspective, and I'd love to hear my fellow panelists' point of view, but we've proven that. What we haven't yet proven is the economic model that works to deliver these products to patients at scale. And that's really where Biotech comes in. Our company has innovated a advanced manufacturing technology as recognized by the FDA, which can produce these products at scale for many, many folds higher numbers of patients at a dramatically lower cost. And these types of innovations are going to be required to treat the next wave of patients, maybe in solid tumors or in autoimmune disease or other types of indications that have very large patient populations.
Great. So Shyam, you have anything to add for that?
Yeah, sure. Hope this is working. So the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, CIRM, is a unique agency. We're a California grant funding agency of $8.5 billion. We're founded and funded by the people of California. They voted for us. And our main mission is to basically accelerate the development of cell and gene therapies from really early stage research to the final trials that you need to do before you can file with the FDA for approval. And so Jason mentioned some of the transformative therapies, and there's quite a few examples. So what really jump-started this whole field was a lot of work that Kristen pioneered, which is CAR-T therapies, where you can take your immune cells out of your own body, supercharge them, put them back in the body to fight cancer. And that has really allowed us to take that sort of technology and apply it to all kinds of other areas. And so a lot of what CIRM funds is an area called regenerative medicine. And so here we take stem cells in the lab and turn them into different types of tissue cells. So these could be brain cells, nerve cells. They could be islet cells for type 1 diabetes. It could be heart cells for cardiac heart disease. And once you take and make those in the lab, what really needed to be demonstrated was, can you put those in patients and can they regenerate dying organs or dying tissues? And in the last few years, we've seen the early evidence of this in clinical trials. So for example, there's been work done in Parkinson's disease where you can inject these stem cell-derived neural cells into patients and reduce their symptoms. And similarly, you can take cells, turn them into islet cells, transplant them into patients that have type 1 diabetes and take them off of insulin. And some of the work that CIRM has funded is a company called Neurona Therapeutics, where they're able to take stem cells, turn them into neuron cells, and inject them in patients who have drug-resistant epilepsy. And in very early clinical trials, these patients have seen 90% reduction in seizure rate. And so if that holds out in later stage clinical trials, they have a phase 3 trial with the FDA that they're planning to do that. This could be transformative, as Jason mentioned, for these patients who either first didn't have any therapies that they can use, and now they have a therapy that dramatically reduces seizures, and they can go on living their lives. And so that brings up the question of, you have these therapies that are being developed. They're complicated manufacturing processes, they're very complex products, and you're going after diseases that are fairly prevalent and global. How do you scale? And that's a lot of what Jason was talking about, is that these challenges are going to be faced here, but there's no option but to solve them, because if they work, patients are going to want them. The healthcare system is going to want it, and it's on us and as funders, it's on the developers, it's on the investors to come together and find ways to solve these problems.
Thank you very much. I think that's really amazing for the cell therapy already put clinically the efficacy and the safety. Right now, we're just asking how we can make it as more accessible to the patients. For the next question, I want to give to Kristen and Richard, because both of you have been working as doctors, the physicians, and also you work with a big pharma. So the first one for Kristen is in the first generation of a CAR T. You've been literally working on that yourself since literally 1990s, right? What do you see actually is the most important lesson we learned we should not really repeat in the cell therapy 2.0? And Richard, the same kind of a similar question to you is, from investment perspective, what do you see the challenges for this area and for the learning in the future?
Yeah, I like to think of it less about what should we not repeat and what have we learned from the current generation of approved cell therapies, which, are commercially available, and the commercial access, patient access is expanding daily, monthly. So I don't think they've been failures. There's just always room for improvement. What problems do we still need to solve? And coming at it from a translational medicine standpoint, I think I like to focus it in 3 areas. Or 4 areas. I call it the 4 T's. We need good targets for these immune cells to target tumors, especially the solid tumors. They need to traffic to the tumor. They need to get into the microenvironment of the tumor, the tumor microenvironment, and function in the set of all these immune inhibition they face there. And then you need to optimize just the fitness of the T cell. You need to keep them functioning and surviving long enough to have these breakthrough miraculous events. And what excites me most, now that I advise a lot of startup biotech companies, is there are efforts to do all of that in the next generation of products. One exciting area is, can you paint the solid tumors with a better target if they don't already have a good target, and then come in with your CAR T cell and kill the solid tumor that now has your painted on target? That's one interesting idea. Can you knock out genes in the T cell to optimize their function and fitness so that they work better and live longer? Because T cells are designed by evolution to dampen down their activity after it's been exposed to a viral infection, for example. And can we modulate that so you get persistent anti-tumor effect? Can you optimize its ability to work in this, toxic environment of a solid tumor mass by engineering other things, certain cytokines, other molecules into the T cell to, counteract those inhibitory factors in the tumor? So I'm quite optimistic about the future for the next generation of therapies. We do need to solve the manufacturing logistical complexities. I always say, though, if you're going to bet on something, don't bet on cancer biology, bet on the engineers. Those are the solvable problems. Can we make a box that does all the manufacturing in a closed system that's sterile, that can sit on a shelf? Yeah, probably we can do that. Right. Can you figure out why tumors evolve and adapt to everything you treat them with? That's harder. So bet on the engineers. The logistics will get easier. The fundamental biology is being tackled on many fronts. So hopefully people are excited. And then the fundamental challenge of, you got to take the T cells out of the patient and modify them in a lab and expand them and freeze them and ship them back. And that's inherently complicated. Well, all of the acquisitions that you talked about are in the field of in vivo cell therapy, where you just take your transducing agent, often it's a virus or it's a RNA coated in lipid nanoparticles, and you just inject it like a normal pharmaceutical agent into the patient. Now that's much more of a traditional platform. Of course, everyone would love to take ex vivo cell therapy and turn it in vivo. There's some low-hanging fruit. That's where all the acquisitions have happened. But, that is also an exciting new direction for the field.
So Richard, from an investment perspective?
Good. So a couple of things that I just would like to emphasize from the investor perspective. So at Third Rock, we're investors in a particular way. We build biotech companies, and then we help to get them going by making an investment, typically with a syndicate. What you've heard so far is that there's a transformative type of therapy that has already proven itself. And you need to absorb that because it's true. What you've also heard is that it is difficult, and it's difficult in two ways. One is the version 1.0, which Shyam described, and involves taking the cells from the person, modifying them so that they can kill cancer cells, putting them back and letting them go to work. That's difficult. It is technically hard. It takes a while. It took a long time to get it to work right. And the second point is it's expensive. So you have problems of scale and you have problems of reimbursement. The other thing that Shyam said that I want you to take in is we have to do this. And given the efficacy of these therapies, which you've heard about and which are in fact true. There are people who were on death's door for various reasons that are now walking around years later cured because of these therapies. So somebody's going to win. And what you would like to look for are people that have convinced you that they're able to deal with these questions of scale, questions of reimbursement, and then, of course, it all is going to come back to what matters to the patient, which is efficacy and safety. The last thing I want to leave you with at this point is that the version 1.0 of cell therapies that you've heard about were these CAR T therapies, which were taken from the patient, modified, and put back in the patient. There are some real advantages there, because those cells are not going to attack anything but the tumor, and they're not going to be rejected by the patient's immune system. But there are the problems of scale. Another way to do this might be to take cells from a healthy person, modify them in a number of ways so that they can be given safely, turn them into killers and put them back in as if they were the person's own cells, and let them go to work. So this is autologous, that's the person, or allo, which is somebody else. And then the third way, which is slightly science fiction, but not really, because it's here now and there have been deals based on it from Capstan, as you've already heard, that Kristen mentioned, and that is, let's don't take the cells out of anybody and do anything to them. Let's engineer them inside the person. Let's engineer the person's own cells. Let's target the cells that have the ability to be tumors. Let's give them a type of gene therapy, to kill tumors. Let's give them a type of gene therapy so that they can manifest that ability and just let them go to work. That's called in vivo editing. Those are three totally linked, but rather different technologies to accomplish the same thing. And my sort of comparator here is what I lived through in the music world. I started out with vinyl, went to cassettes, went to CDs, went to streaming, and it took time to figure out who was going to win. Who won? Vinyl and streaming. So as investors, you have to look out over the landscape and work with expert advisors, figure out who's going to win in this area, because somebody is, and it's going to be a hell of an investment.
Fantastic. I think that's all very inspiring. We heard there's accessibility, we have in vivo cell therapy, and we hear that on engineer. And also we heard scalability. It seems like we have a new North Star for this community to move forward. With that being said, actually, I want to have a question back to Jason and Kristen, because right now we see this new technology come along. When do you think is possible for the cell therapy as a 100,000 treatment rather than a 500,000 treatment? Is it possible? Is it realistic? What's the roadmap to get there? And also from Kristen, from your perspective, what kind of innovation do you think can drive us to get there?
It's absolutely possible. I mean, I think the range of sticker price for today's autologous cell therapies in the 400,000 to 500,000 range. Gene therapies range up to almost $5 million. So there's a whole kind of range within cell and gene therapy, but the vast majority of patients are getting treated with the first bucket, the autologous cell therapies. With work that we've done with companies, large pharma companies that have products in the market, automation and technologies like Ori has developed can deliver a 30 to 50% cost of goods savings off the top. So you implement it immediately, what you're doing now, no need to do anything else, just implement the technology. That alongside a throughput gain of about 10 times in the same footprint. So we get 10 times more doses at half the cost. That's a good start. There's lots of other things that need to happen as well, but being able to make more doses physically. Today, we treat globally about 5% of the available patient population. So all those sick people who get to the end of their journey with chemotherapy or other things, maybe they have leukemia or lymphoma, multiple myeloma, one of those blood cancers, only about 5% globally are able to receive CAR T therapy. And that has for a whole bunch of reasons. A lot of it's logistical, some of it's geographical, some of it's cost. But if we can just singularly make more doses, make them more available for patients, and make them less expensively, then the opportunity is there to move them earlier into the treatment pathway. We've seen already a couple of BMS's products, so Breyanzi, we have Yescarta, and we have Carvykti, all of which have received second-line therapy. So it's the second option for doctors to choose in their respective diseases. So earlier line of therapy is important for access, making them more available, just being able to physically make more doses, and to do so more cost effectively. Those are kind of basics, economics that are happening today as we speak, as these developers implement new technologies.
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify on the cost of goods, back to betting on the engineers. The cost of goods to make an autologous genetically engineered cell today is quite high. But there are so many easy ways to change that. I mean, I'll give you one example, lentiviral vector, which is the vector that's used to modify T cells. Historically, that was made in plastic, little plastic containers in very small scale, and it was stuck to the plastic. Now you can make that in 100-liter bioreactors, think brewing beer. It brings the cost of that component down 95%. And you can just apply that mindset to everything about the manufacturing process. Automation, a lot of the cost is people. You can automate that. So I think cost of goods has a very easy line of sight to drop it by 90%. That starts to get into the more traditional pharmaceutical type product cost of goods. Then you brought up just complexity and patient access. Right now, these cells have to be given in special centers of excellence. When they first launched, there was a limited number of centers of excellence. Now there's an ever-growing number of centers of excellence, and managing the side effects is not as hard as people think. My daughter just graduated from medical school. She rotated through the CAR T inpatient infusion unit. The next generation of doctors are going to know how to give these therapies and manage the side effects, and then the FDA will back off on the requirements that you have to travel to a center of excellence and stay there for a month. I mean, that's hard for people. That minimizes access. If you can bring these products into the community, if community doctors get comfortable managing the patients, you can imagine patient access will improve. So cost of goods will come down, patient access will go up. I don't think those are the hardest problems. The hardest problems is the challenge of cancer biology.
Fantastic. I really look forward to turn the cell therapy to a stable spreadsheet reality rather than just a headline. So with that, I want to build up on that actually from an investment perspective for Richard and Shyam. I think especially for Shyam, for CIRM so far has seen deployed billions of dollars in public funding, right? So from your perspective, what do you think actually for the public and non-dilutable fund can best catalyze a private investment? And also for Richard, because Third Rock is one of the well-known private investment in the field. Do you think we can find a really good way for public and private investor to work jointly to de-risk the early stage and development in this ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Joy. So right now, we've funded over 120 clinical trials for these transformative medicines, and we have an active portfolio of over 250 projects that we're supporting, everything from early discovery through pivotal clinical trials for cell and gene therapies across the whole spectrum of diseases. And so when we look at this, we have to keep supporting these therapies as they go forward. And one of the things Joy mentioned earlier on is the last few years have been really challenging from an investment and funding perspective for a lot of the biotechs and academic investigators who are developing these novel therapies. It's the IPO market has dropped out, as well as venture investment has gotten harder and harder for them to tap into. And so as a funding agency, we're here to de-risk these assets until they can be picked up by investors or by pharma partners. And we're finding that we have to de-risk it even more than we had to before. And so some of the things that we're implementing are making programs, our grant programs, faster, making them deeper, and so that we can fund more of their pathway to get to de-risking. They can have clinical proof of concept before they go for their Series A investment from folks like Richard and others. And also at the same time, really making them focus on defining the value proposition and thinking about the commercialization pathway very early on. So thinking about these challenges of patient access, affordability, how are they going to think about reimbursement? What is going to be their strategy? Because as Kristen mentioned, for years now, they've trailblazed the pathway to create a commercial model for these cell therapies. It may not be perfect, but it does work, and there's plenty of evidence out there now. And so we want the companies that we fund that are just starting to think about their clinical trials to also think at the same time about what evidence they'll need for reimbursement, what's going to be the pricing considerations, how are they going to make these therapies more accessible to the patient population that they're targeting. So all that earlier, but also at the same time giving them more funding to get the security they need to keep going forward with development.
Great. So there are three mechanisms that we think about in non-dilutive funding. And I can tell you, because of the factors that Shyam mentioned, we think about it a lot these days. Small biotech companies think a great deal about non-dilutive funding. First is opportunities like CIRM, mechanisms like CIRM, of which there are almost one, CIRM. And so this term de-risking that we use to try to explain what we're doing when we get proof of concept in the clinic that something is working, it sounds pretty kind of white bread or vanilla and not very interesting, but actually it's the most exciting moment in drug development when you actually get a sense that what you've been working on is effective in the clinic and is safe. And so de-risking cannot be overstated in terms of its importance. And so organizations like CIRM that actually fund clinical experiments are crucial to the ecosystem. And this is an area that you as investors should keep a close eye on, because what you want is to invest in something that's going to pay off. So that de-risking moment is crucial. The other two mechanisms that I would call out also relate to some of the things that Shyam mentioned. So there are and have been for years what are called pre-competitive consortia that involve multiple companies and then typically a government agency like the NIH, which will partner together and put resources into learning something that nobody would take on by themselves. So as an example, some cell therapies are going to be applicable in the context of rare diseases. Knowing how those diseases behave in their natural history, meaning without any treatment. So you can understand what to expect if a treatment works. getting that sort of information can be carried out by these public-private consortia. The other thing that they could do, and I think will be essential for our ecosystem, is to get real-world data about what happens when you give this type of cell therapy for that indication. So actually to establish the database that we're going to need to address the challenges around reimbursement. So those are two areas. The third one is not often thought of, but it's worth thinking about. Small biotech companies in partnership often with academics can apply for funding for grants, just like an academic investigator. Some of the work that we do around cell therapies is in fact basic science. So we always have to have a potency assay. Is the cell doing what it's supposed to do, at least in a tissue culture dish, to give you confidence it'll work in the human being? One person's potency assay is another person's fundamental T-cell biology. So you can apply for support to generate that type of data. Another type of information that we are going to need, particularly in the autologous cell therapy space, is to understand, why does one person's cell preparation turn into a fantastically effective cell therapy and the other person's not so much? Is it the person? Is it the condition? Is it genetics? Is it other medicines they're taking? These are basic science questions. Grants can be written to support the investigations that will get us those data. And those will be catalytic for you as investors to bring these therapies forward further into the clinic.
Fantastic. I think that's basically Richard Land outlined the matrix for evaluating for the cell therapy when you're looking at a potential de-risking. And from Kristen, what do you see for the red flag, for example, because you work with a lot of startup companies, what do you see as a red flag when you see some startup at an early stage?
At the end of the day, it comes down to the science. You know, how do you solve the problems that have been identified with the first generation of products? Those are often scientific problems to solve. And so you need to have a credible hypothesis for how you're going to tackle that problem, and then have a technology to do it in credible science to support that hypothesis. You know, what I would say is, you know, it's always hard when you're evaluating early stage companies and animal studies to pick the winners. But if you just look at the field of cell and gene therapy and the typically incremental change in the advancement of science, you know, with a lot of first in class and then me too, I'm going to be best in class type approaches. And then you see these quantum leap changes. Quantum leap changes have already occurred with CAR T cells, first in blood cancers. Now they're moving into autoimmune disease. You know, 3 years ago, the very first presentation of a response of a CAR T cell in a lupus patient was presented at the American College of Rheumatology meetings. 3 years later, 30% of all presentations at that conference have to do with cell therapy for autoimmune disease. So as an investor, the question is, do you want to be in a field where there is going to be quantum leap changes? Or do you want to work perhaps on the slightly less risky Me Too, best-in-class angles for the, you know, the 13 cancer targets that have been targeted for the last 50 years? So yes, there are some red flags, and you have to do your deep scientific diligence to believe that that next generation technology is going to tackle an important problem. But fundamentally, engineering the immune system to treat human disease, not just cancer, autoimmune disease, cancer, maybe neurodegenerative disorders, organ transplant, affords the opportunity for quantum leap change. So if I was an investor, I would invest.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kristen. So it seems like we have a bright future, very positive, and we have a lot of innovation technologies. And also it seems we could find a way, path moving forward, make it sustainable. And what is the remains as a key bottleneck then at this point? It is the scalability. I heard we talking about a lot of scalability, people, we're talking about the regulation, reimbursement. What do you think? Maybe we start from Jason.
Sure. I hear a lot of people make an analogy between kind of 15 years into biologics. So kind of large molecules, we're trying to figure out how to make them at grams per liter that the COGS made sense, and how do we make them consistently. And it required innovation. It required stable cell lines and single-use bioreactors and lots of other innovations to make biologics become what they are today. And in the next year or two, they will be the leading source of revenue for biopharma. I think we're at that same sort of inflection point. We're sort of seeing CGT 1.0 in the rearview mirror, all the pioneers who've learned the hard way how expensive and time-consuming it can be to bring a cell therapy to market, and still have challenging economic profiles for those products, to the next generation of products, CGT 2.0, which has not only the benefits of the scientific discoveries that Kristen was just referencing, but also a new infrastructure around them. So I think I don't know how many specialist biotech investors there are in the room. I'm guessing since we're not at bio, there's probably some generalists at least. Another way to play this is, if you believe that cell therapy is a modality that will exist in the future, is through the picks and shovels, is to say, actually, we need a new infrastructure. Companies like Sartorius and Paul, which is now, part of Danaher and Thermo Fisher, and these companies have built their whole portfolio around supporting the biopharma industry in making products, essentially bioprocessing. That's what they make billions and billions of dollars supporting biopharma to make these products. The binary risk of therapy development may not be for everyone in the room. There may be an opportunity to play in a different way, where you're supporting the infrastructure that supports this next generation of therapies as they come to market at scale.
Anyone else in the panel want to compliment for that?
I think the biggest challenge right now is investor hesitancy. And I'll point to a lesson I learned from hiking a very long trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and reading a book on how not to die on the mountain. There is no substitute for an early start. So I think if investors want to be on the front wave of the next wave of cell and gene therapy, with all of the things that are being tried, both from the manufacturing optimization to the biological optimization, there's no substitute for an early start. And the data will come, and then everyone will jump on, and the people who started early will be the winners.
Right, it's a really interesting experience sharing for that, Kristen. Actually, I have a follow-up question for you. You did a fantastic job, I think, 3 years ago in a very famous the community IO 360. And that's regarding for the autologous allogeneic debate. She did a really inspiring talk over there representing for autologous cell. Do you think that debate right now is still relevant for our current society? And what do you think in the future we're going to move into? Is it a hybrid, or you still going to favor for one versus the other?
Well, as Richard mentioned, there are a number of different platforms for cell therapy. There's the fully autologous, where you take your own T cells out, modify them, give them back. There's the off-the-shelf allogeneic, where you have a collection of allogeneic T cells that have been engineered and sitting on a shelf. Of course, that adds the biologic challenge of you need to edit those cells to make them non-immunogenic, but progress is being made there. And then there's the holy grail, which is just, inject the viral vector or some other transducing agent into the patient, use the patient's own body as a manufacturing plant. All of these platforms are still at play, and I'd say progress has been made and is being made on all fronts. The newest is in vivo. But even the allogeneic, how do you engineer a cell to make it inert to the immune system? There's been some real progress there. I'm thinking about islet cell transplants for diabetes right now, with a new strategy to keep the immune system from rejecting those. So I think it's premature to pick the winning platform. They are all optimizing, learning, and evolving. And while everybody loves in vivo right now, it's probably not going to solve every problem of cell and gene therapy.
Thank you very much. I think I have another question for Richard regarding for the reimbursement, because you mentioned that in your matrix. So how do you think we should rethink the value-based modeling in the cell therapy space and make it as a long-term viable for these treatments?
Yeah, that's another big problem that the field faces. Cell therapies are different from other kinds of medicines. They are living medicines. They can have duration of effect that can be lifelong, meaning a single treatment and a cure, or they can have durations that are totally unlike any other therapeutic you might consider. One treatment lasting for 5 years, for example. And so at the same time, as you've heard, they're expensive. They need special facilities. These are things that are being worked on and will, over time, make a big difference in the expense. But with reference to these 3 different platforms, we don't really know in real hardcore data sense which one is going to work best for which indication. And so we have to rethink the reimbursement model to accommodate these transformative therapies. One approach that has been talked about widely is that instead of paying for delivery, in other words, I give you a pill and you give me money, you would pay for durability, which is the defining characteristic of these cell therapies. So there would be some form of negotiated contract by which there might be an upfront payment and then an annual payment as long as the treatment is successful. And there would be agreed terms about how long that would be and for how much, and what would happen if in one person the therapy waned in its efficacy before it was expected. This has been talked about widely. It would probably need at least 2 things. One is exceptionally hard and committed work by the companies and the payers to work out what this would look like. And secondly, as I talked about before in reference to CIRM and also to the pre-competitive consortia, we need data about how these perform in the real world, in real people, and which platform for which indication is going to sort of be the standard of care. So there are ways to get to the solution of the reimbursement problem, as there are for the other engineering challenges that we're facing. Not going to be easy, but it's not going to take winning the Nobel Prize either.
Thank you very much. I think we covered a lot of stuff today. It seems the cell therapy already moved beyond just for the efficacy and the safety. Now we're moving more towards accessibility and scalability. So with that, I'm thinking we covered the vision, we covered the sustainability, and also for the potential, the solution for the bottlenecks. With that, I would have a lightning question for each of the panelists. So in your mind, in 2030, what do you think the cell therapy would be? Probably just using one sentence to summarize for what you're thinking about. Starting with Jason?
Sure. I think we'll see cell therapies in multiple types of cancer, including solid tumors. We already have a few, but broadening that out and into other diseases like autoimmune, as Kristen mentioned, but also things like cardiovascular disease and other types of chronic diseases. And they will be accessible first line. We're expecting our first line therapy approval this year for, I think, Yescarta will be the first. So much greater, wider accessibility, much more affordable for payers, and many more products, many more diseases being treated.
Standard of care. Cell therapies will be standard of care, part of the armamentarium. You'll have small molecules, antibodies, and cells, and they'll be used across a wide range of human disease.
I'll stipulate everything that you've just heard and add one further thing. So we've talked a lot about these 3 different platforms. They are different ways to solve a single problem, but they're not biologically identical. They're not really exactly the same technology. So I think in 2030, we're going to have real hard knowledge about which ones work for which indications.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I support everything that's been said so far, but to get there, I think we're going to need the investors along for the ride in 2 areas, as Richard mentioned. The first is around financial innovation, around some of these commercialization models and payment models. And there's a lot of financial innovation that needs to be done where creative minds like yours can really help in that space to come up with these new models that are realistic for our fragmented healthcare system and to support the companies when they're making these hazard value-based agreements. And the second area that Richard also highlighted was a massive amount of data that we're all sitting on, the companies, the funders, the investors, and so on, in this space, manufacturing, preclinical, clinical. All of that data needs to be leveraged and harnessed for useful good. For example, figuring out what are the right ways to deliver these therapies in vivo, allogeneic, autologous for that right disease population. Or how do we use all this data to generate evidence for payers? And that's an area where investors have a keen eye for technology could really play a role.
Thank you very much. I think for today, we run out of time. We won't be able to cover all of the questions, but I think at least we can share some of the light and also the thought for moving forward, the future of this community. I think we know that this is really the community right now at the brink of transforming from just a scientific dream into a really health solution. As Kristen mentioned, we are looking at potentially it's become a standard of care, right? So that requires more intensive, extensive collaboration across the sections, including the investment world. So we look forward to having you to join us together for this dream to come into true. With that, I'm gonna really appreciate the panelists and also invite you to join me to appreciate all the conversation they share with us today and also the opinions of wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you very much.